The galaxy's oldest secret lived at the edge. HFY. There are moments in life when everything stops, not slowly, not gradually, not the way a sunset fades or a fire burns down, instantly. 1 second the world is moving. Noise, data, conversation, the ordinary hum of a ship doing its job in the middle of nowhere. And then something happens. Something small. Something that in isolation means nothing. And the world stops. This was one of those moments. And it began. As the most important moments often do. Not with an explosion, not with a discovery, not with anything dramatic at all. It began with a pause, a hesitation in a data stream so brief that 3 different automated systems had already flagged it as noise and moved on, so brief that the sensor officer almost didn't say anything. Almost. Captain. His voice was quiet. Careful. The voice of someone who has looked at something twice and is now looking at it a 3rd time because the first 2 times didn't make sense. Captain Mara Ilias looked up from her console. She had been filling out a routine survey log. The kind of documentation that existed purely because someone, somewhere, had once decided that exploration vessels needed to justify their fuel expenditure in writing. She had been doing it on autopilot, the way you do things you've done 1,000 times, her mind half on the log and half on the coffee cooling at her elbow. She looked up. "The signal," her sensor officer said. "It didn't fade." Mara set down her stylus. "Everything fades," she said, not dismissively, as a statement of fact, because it was a statement of fact. Radiation faded, echoes faded, gravitational anomalies, quantum noise, the leftover whispers of ancient stellar events, everything, eventually, decayed into background. That was physics. That was the universe doing what the universe did. The sensor officer looked at her, with a particular expression of someone about to say something they know sounds impossible. "This one didn't decay," he said. A beat. It waited. The bridge went quiet, not the alert quiet of a crew responding to danger, the deeper quiet of a crew encountering something that doesn't fit any category they've been trained for. Humans were used to danger. Danger, at least, was familiar. This was something else. A word about the UNS Wayfarer, because the Wayfarer matters. It was not a prestigious vessel. It was not the kind of ship that appeared in recruitment posters or got written up in exploration journals or carried the names of famous commanders in its registry. It was old, genuinely, stubbornly, impressively old, kept functional by a combination of skilled engineering, creative maintenance, and the specific kind of institutional stubbornness that refuses to decommission something that still technically works. Its hull had been patched in 11 places. Its secondary drive had been rebuilt twice from components that were not, strictly speaking, designed for it. Its navigation AI had a personality quirk, a tendency toward mild editorial commentary, that 3 separate software updates had failed to remove and that the crew had eventually decided to classify as a feature. It carried a crew of 43. Scientists, engineers, pilots, a medic who was also inexplicably an excellent cook, and a captain who had chosen deep-range exploration specifically because deep-range exploration took you places where nobody was watching too closely. Its mission. Classification. In the official registry of Earth's Exploration Division read, "Low priority, high curiosity," which, as Mara had noted more than once, was basically the motto of the entire human species. They were 6 weeks from the nearest charted system. No escort, no backup. No one expecting to hear from them for another month. The signal that had waited for them had chosen its audience well. "Mark the coordinates," Mara said. The navigation AI, whose name, after 3 years of working together, the crew had informally settled on as Nav, processed the request. "Captain," Nav said, in the tone it used when it was about to be diplomatically unhelpful. "Those coordinates place the source approximately 240 light-years beyond the outer boundary of all mapped space, beyond political jurisdiction, beyond treaty coverage, beyond permission," Mara said. "I was going to say beyond sensor range of any rescue asset," Nav said. "But yes, also beyond permission." Mara looked at the coordinates. Then she looked at her crew. 43 people who had signed up for a low-priority, high curiosity mission 6 weeks from anywhere. 43 people who had, every single one of them, chosen this assignment specifically, because they wanted to be the kind of people who went to places nobody had been before. "Plot the jump," she said. Nav paused for exactly the length of time it took to register an objection without technically making one. "Plotted," it said. The jump was smooth, too smooth. Interstellar jumps have a texture to them, a quality that experienced spacers learned to read the way sailors once read weather. The subtle vibration of a drive working against the resistance of space. The particular quality of light bending as the ship pressed through the geometry of faster-than-light travel. This jump had none of that. Space didn't resist. It didn't bend. It simply stepped aside. Stars stretched in the viewports, the familiar blue shift of acceleration. And then they didn't snap back the way they were supposed to. They just vanished. Not darkness. Darkness implies the absence of light, and light implies a universe full of sources. This was absence, a quality of not there that was fundamentally different from dark. "Nav," the first officer said quietly. "Where are we?" "Processing," Nav said. And then, after a pause that was longer than any processing delay had any right to be, "I'm not certain," which was, in the Wayfarer's history, the first time Nav had ever said that. "Captain." The voice came from engineering. The chief engineer, a woman named Bashir, who had kept the Wayfarer's drive running through 2 near disasters and 1 incident that technically didn't have a name yet because the paperwork hadn't been filed. "Our reactors just dropped to idle." Mara's hand moved toward the emergency panel. "Damage report?" "No damage," Bashir said slowly. She sounded less alarmed than confused, which was somehow more unsettling. "They're just not needed." The Wayfarer's life support was running perfectly, gravity at exactly 1 standard Earth. Power flowing through every system without interruption. Something else was providing it. Something outside the ship was holding everything together. Mara took a breath. "All hands," she said, keeping her voice the specific caliber of calm that a captain learns to maintain regardless of what her internal state is doing. "Non-essential stations to stand by. Bridge crew maintain positions. No one does anything until I say so." She looked at the viewports, at the absence, at whatever was out there in it. "We wait," she said, "and we watch."
The stars returned slowly. Not all at once. Gradually, the way your eyes adjust to light after a long time in darkness. First one, then a cluster, then more, spreading across the viewport in a pattern that was immediately, obviously wrong. Wrong not in the way of malfunction or error.
Wrong in the way of something fundamentally different from anything the crew had seen before. These were old stars. Old. Not the 10-billion-year-old stars that anchored the galaxy's structure. Something beyond that. Something that made the concept of age feel different, feel heavier, in a way that was hard to articulate but impossible to miss. Red giants hanging in space like dying suns wrapped in their own luminescence. White dwarfs, the cooling cores of stars that had burned through their fuel and collapsed inward, dotting the darkness like fading embers. A brown dwarf drifting alone, a star that had never quite ignited, patient in its incompleteness. "This isn't the edge of the galaxy," the science officer said softly. He was staring at his displays with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of a subject is being revised in real time. "This is..." He paused, tried again. "This is where galaxies come to rest." The universe, it turned out, had an age. A physical, structural age written into the condition of its oldest objects. And whatever lay beyond the edge of charted space, whatever they had jumped to, was deep in that age. Ancient in a way that made human civilization, made the Galactic Council's 12,000 years, made even Veil Tor feel like something that had happened recently. The structure appeared, without announcement, no alarm triggered, no proximity alert. It simply resolved out of the background, the way a face emerges from a pattern once you've seen it. Suddenly obvious, suddenly impossible to unsee. It was vast, Not vast in the way of large ships or space stations or even the megastructures that humanity had theorized and occasionally glimpsed evidence of. Vast in a way that redefined the scale against which the crew was measuring everything. A ring, circular, closed, complete, so large that the wayfarer's sensors needed several seconds to map its full dimensions and then returned a result that the science officer read twice before accepting. Larger than solar systems, made of materials that the scanners didn't have entries for. Not unidentified. Uncategorizable, as if whatever it was built from wasn't a material in any sense the sensors were designed to measure. It orbited nothing, not a star, not a black hole, not any gravitational anchor. It simply existed in the deep old space at the edge of everything, perfectly stable, perfectly positioned, as if the concept of needing an anchor was something it had considered and declined. At its center, where the eye was drawn without understanding quite why, a single point of light, steady, unwavering, watching. "Captain." The comms officer's voice had the careful flatness of someone managing their own response very deliberately. "It's hailing us." The bridge was completely still. 43 humans, 6 weeks from anywhere, at the edge of the known universe, being hailed by something that had been here since before stars like Earth's sun had formed. Mara looked at the comms officer. "Audio only," she said. The channel opened. The voice that filled the bridge did not come from the speakers the way sound normally did, entering through the ears, processed by the brain, understood through the mechanism of hearing. It arrived differently, completely. Fully formed in the mind of everyone present simultaneously, in their own language, in a register that bypassed the ordinary pathways of communication entirely. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You are early." Mara leaned forward in her chair. "We didn't know we were invited," she said. A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. The pause of something measuring the gap between what was asked and what it wanted to say. No one ever does. There was a quality to the silence that followed that the crew would struggle to describe afterward. Not uncomfortable. The opposite of uncomfortable, actually. The silence of something very large and very old that is not alarmed by your presence. That has been expecting something like you, in some form, for longer than you can meaningfully. "Imagine. You built this language from us," Mara said. She wasn't entirely sure how she knew that. Something in the texture of it, the specificity, the way it carried not just meaning, but context. Human context. The particular emotional weight that human words carried. "From everyone," the voice replied. A pause. Over a very long time. The hologram activated without anyone touching a control. It filled the bridge. Not a projection, not a display, something that existed in the space around them as if it had always been there, and they were only now able to see it. It showed the universe, not a map, not data. The universe itself compressed into something perceivable, galaxies forming out of the cooling aftermath of the beginning, condensing from the vast dark clouds of hydrogen and helium into the first stars, the first light. And then, life, civilizations igniting like sparks across the darkness, brief, bright, the specific intensity of something burning, everything it has to produce that light, and then gone. Again, then again. Spark after spark after spark, each one brilliant and brief and gone, the darkness reclaiming each one, the universe continuing, indifferently, again, and again, and again, until the pattern became undeniable, until what had seemed like history revealed itself as something else. A cycle. "You're recording us," Mara said softly. Not an accusation, a recognition. "We are preserving the cycle," the voice answered, "and preventing its collapse." Mara sat with that for a moment. Then, carefully, "The way you approach something you're not sure you want the answer to," she said. "Collapse how?" The hologram shifted, a civilization, ancient beyond the ability of the display to meaningfully date. The numbers were there, but numbers that large ceased to function as numbers, and became simply gestures toward incomprehensibility. They were brilliant. Whatever they were, whatever form they took, whatever history they carried, the record of their achievement radiated from the hologram like heat from a fire. Art, science, philosophy. The accumulated weight of a civilization that had, by every measure, done everything right. They had reached the edge, not accidentally, not naively. With full understanding of what they were doing, with all the capability their civilization had built over millions of years, they had come to the boundary where the charted universe ended and the deep old darkness began. And they had reached into it, not with curiosity, with ambition, with the specific recklessness of a species that has mastered everything within its reach and decided that the only logical next step is to reach for what lies beyond. They pulled at the fabric of reality, not metaphorically, literally, physically, with technology that treated the structure of space-time as something to be used rather than respected. Space folded in ways it was not designed to fold. Time fractured. Stars died, not in the ordinary, slow death of stellar evolution, but suddenly, catastrophically, as if the universe itself was recoiling from what had been done to it. The ripple spread outward at the speed of physics. It was still spreading, had been spreading for longer than human civilization had existed, would continue spreading for longer than human civilization was likely to last. Everything has limits, the voice said, even the universe. Mara looked at the place in the hologram where the ancient civilization had been. What happened to them? A pause. They became a lesson. She closed her eyes for a moment. How many lessons have there been? The hologram answered without words. The sparks of civilizations, the ones she had seen ignite and go out, over and over in the display. Some of them hadn't simply faded, some of them had ended like that one. Bright, reaching, and then gone, taking everything around them with them. The darkness between the sparks was not just the ordinary darkness of the universe. Some of it was consequence. So you stop them, Mara said. Civilizations that get too close to the edge, you stop them. We guide them. There's a difference? Yes. Mara opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. What's the difference? The voice took its time. A wall stops. A guide shows you why the wall exists. One creates resentment, the other creates understanding. We have had a very long time to learn which one lasts. A new element appeared in the hologram, ships. Hundreds of them at first, then thousands. An archive of vessels that had arrived at this place over the span of the structure's existence. Every design different, every hull shape unique. The accumulated record of every spacefaring civilization that had pushed far enough, fast enough, curious enough to arrive at the edge of everything and find something waiting. Mara scanned them slowly. Ancient shapes she didn't recognize. Designs so alien they barely registered as ships at all. The occasional familiar silhouette of a species she knew from council records. And then, near the end of the archive, unmistakable. The angular, practical lines of human engineering. Human hulls, human ships, not just the wayfarer, others. Explorers who had come before, apparently, without ever filing a report, or without being able to file a report. You've been watching us, Mara said, since before we knew you existed. Since you first looked up, the voice confirmed. We watch all of them. From the beginning. We watch for the ones who will arrive. You always arrive. Every species that reaches this place, the voice continued, is given a choice. The hologram shifted to show a fork, not literal, but conceptual, rendered in the language of the display. The first path. Return. Forget what you found. Remain within the boundary. Live fully within what you have. It is not a small thing. The universe within the boundary is vast beyond any single civilization's ability to fully explore. You would never reach its limits. You could spend eternity within it and never exhaust its wonders. A pause. Safe. Contained. Complete. Mara waited. And the second path? She asked. The point of light at the center of the structure, the one that had been steady and unwavering since they arrived, brightened, Not blindingly, not dramatically, just more. Stand watch. The bridge was completely silent. Mara looked at the light. Watch for what? She asked. For the ones who reach too far. For the moments when curiosity becomes recklessness. For the civilizations that arrive at the edge with ambition rather than wonder. A pause. For the end of the cycle. Mara leaned back. She looked at her crew, at the faces of 43 people who had come 6 weeks from anywhere on a low-priority, high-curiosity mission because they were the kind of people who needed to know what was out there. What does standing watch actually mean? She asked. Practically, what does it look like? It looks like what you are about to do, the voice said. And then every alarm on the bridge fired simultaneously. Captain. Navigation's voice cut through the noise. Multiple warp signatures, non-human, dropping out of FTL, bearing 270. Range. A pause. They're right on top of us. The viewport showed it before the displays caught up. Ships. A fleet, not enormous but substantial, the kind of force you send when you're serious but not certain. Designs Mara recognized from Council records, Dravex military configuration, angular and armored, and built with the specific aesthetic of a civilization that had decided long ago that the most important thing a ship could communicate was threat. They had followed the signal. Of course they had. The same signal that had led the Wayfarer here had been detectable by anyone with a sensitive enough array, and the willingness to chase it into unmapped space, and the Dravex, unlike humanity, had not come alone. They are not ready, the Kaidi voice said. Quietly, without judgment, the statement of something reading a situation with long experience. Mara was already out of her chair. How long have we got before they're in weapons range? 90 seconds, navigation said. 60 if they accelerate. Mara looked at the structure. At the light, at the choice that had just stopped being theoretical. What do you need? She said. Not what should I do. Not tell me how to handle this. What do you need? The voice was quiet for a moment, long enough that Mara wondered if she'd asked the wrong question. Then, stand between them and the edge, as we once did, as all watchers have done. Mara turned to her crew. 43 people, a patched hull and rebuilt drives, and a navigation AI with opinions. No weapons to speak of, no military training, no backup coming. She looked at them. They looked back. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just the specific quality of eye contact that passes between people who have spent months in close quarters and developed the kind of trust that doesn't need words. She saw in their faces the same thing she felt, not fearlessness. Fear was present. She would have been worried about anyone who claimed otherwise. But underneath the fear, something steadier. Resolve. Move us up, she said. Put us between the fleet and the structure. The Wayfarer moved. There was no engine flare, no thrust, no sensation of acceleration. Space simply made room. The structure, or whatever intelligence moved through it, repositioned the ship the way you move a piece on a board, with the casual precision of something that has been doing this for longer than the concept of moving things has been relevant. The Dravex fleet dropped from warp and within seconds of arrival opened fire. Not warnings, not hailing frequencies, just weapons. Because that was the Dravex response to uncertainty, had always been the Dravex response to uncertainty, centuries of council membership having done nothing to change what 800 years of military culture had built into. Their reflexes. The shots reached the Wayfarer and vanished, not deflected, not absorbed. Removed the way the structure had removed the need for the ship's reactors, cleanly, completely, without drama. Mara opened a channel to the Dravex fleet. This region is closed, she said. Her voice was calm. She was aware that calm was doing a great deal of work right now, and she was grateful for it. Laughter came back over the channel, sharp, dismissive, the specific tone of a military commander who has decided they are dealing with a nuisance. Closed by whom? The Dravex commander said. An exploration vessel? A human science ship? You have no authority here. Mara took one breath. Then she answered honestly. "We do now," she said. Behind the Wayfarer, the structure awakened. Not as a weapon. The point of light at its center didn't become a cannon, no energy discharge. No threatening display. It became a presence. The deep old space around it shifted, not physically, not in any way the Dravex fleet's sensors would have registered as an attack, but in weight, in the particular gravity of something that has existed since before the stars the Dravex called home had ignited, making itself felt. Memories moved through space like a tide, not targeted, not directed, simply present. Every ship in the Dravex fleet, every commander, every pilot, every weapons officer, felt, simultaneously, the accumulated weight of every civilization that had come to this place with weapons drawn, every one that had made that choice, every consequence. The cycle played through them not as data, but as experience, compressed, overwhelming, the accumulated lesson of an archive that had been recording for longer than any of their civilizations. Had existed. The fleet hesitated. Then it broke, not slowly, not reluctantly. Fast. The fastest retreat Mara had ever seen a military formation execute, ships spinning and jumping almost simultaneously, warp signatures blooming across the sensors and then vanishing as the Dravex fleet fled back into the charted galaxy. Fast and afraid. Silence returned to the edge of everything. "You have chosen," the voice said. Mara let out a breath she had been holding for longer than she realized. "Yeah," she said. A pause. "What happens now?" The voice considered the question with the patience of something that has answered it many times. "Now you learn what we know. Now you understand what you are protecting. And now, when the time comes, you pass the choice to the next ones who arrive." Mara looked at the ancient structure, at the old stars dying quietly around it, at the point of light that had been watching civilizations rise and fall and reach too far and pull back and try again since before the galaxy they called home had taken its current shape. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been here?" The voice took its time. "Long enough to know that the cycle has value," it said. "Long enough to know that the sparks are worth protecting. Long enough to have stopped counting." The Wayfarer never returned to known space. Not because it couldn't. The path back was open. The structure never imprisoned anyone, never forced a choice, never held anyone against their will. The first option, return, forget, remain within the boundary, was always available, always real. The crew made their choice together. 43 humans in a patched ship at the edge of everything, given the question that every watcher before them had been given. They chose to stay, not unanimously. 3 crew members returned home, carrying with them only the memory of a signal that led to nothing, a jump that malfunctioned, a few days of sensor anomalies in deep space. Their reports were filed, their debriefs were routine. Nothing in their accounts suggested anything other than an ordinary survey mission that had run slightly longer than planned. Memory, it turned out, was something the structure could work with. The other 40 chose differently. Stories spread through the galaxy slowly. The way stories always spread through the galaxy, through back channels and whispered exchanges, and the particular quality of attention that navigators give to regions that show up blank on every map. Ships that went too far and didn't come back, or came back different. A handful of accounts. Dismissed, mostly, as sensor malfunction or navigator error or the particular variety of psychological stress that long-range exploration could produce, described the same thing, a signal that didn't decay, stars that were old in a way that made other stars feel new, a structure that couldn't exist, and a voice that asked a question. In the deepest archives of the Galactic Council, cross-referenced under edge phenomena and deep space anomalies and unverified exploration accounts, a pattern was quietly, slowly becoming visible to anyone who looked closely enough and was willing to take the accounts seriously. The edge was not empty. Something was there. something that had been there longer than anyone could meaningfully calculate. And recently, very recently, in the timescale of galactic history, human ships had started arriving there more frequently than any other species, not because they were directed there, not because they knew what they were looking for, because they were the kind of species that looked, because low priority, high curiosity was not just a mission classification, it was a description. In the archive of the structure, in the vast record that had been accumulating since before the oldest stars in the current sky had ignited, a new entry was made. Species, humanity, Earth origin. Arrived at edge, standard cycle, 47,182. Choice offered, choice made. Standing watch, below. It, in a notation that the archive had developed over millions of years of record-keeping, a single additional line, arrived early. Stayed anyway, characteristic. Years later, a young officer on a Galactic Council survey vessel, charting the outer boundary of mapped space, documenting the standard features of the transition zone between the charted galaxy and the deep dark. Beyond, noticed something strange in her sensor readings. A signal, brief, directional, originating from somewhere far beyond the mapped boundary. It didn't fade. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at the coordinates, at the distance, at the notation in the navigation database that marked everything beyond that boundary as unmapped, no data. She thought about it. Then she flagged it in her log as sensor anomaly, probable instrument error, and moved on. She was not ready. She knew it. And somewhere at the edge of everything, in the deep old space where stars came to rest, something patient and ancient and endlessly watchful noted her hesitation and waited. Because that was what watchers did. They waited. For the ones who would come, for the ones who would choose, for the next spark, in the long chain of sparks that would decide the darkness was worth standing in, because the light behind them was worth protecting, and the universe, old and vast and incomprehensibly patient, continued,